Hey everyone. So today I'm going to be talking about some advanced drawing lessons. So I know in the past several weeks, even probably a month or so, I've been diving into the beginner stages of drawing, and I thought that I would go full circle and help those of you that maybe want some more advanced techniques to help further along your skills. And I'm just jumping right into a finished drawing that I did here of a spider bird. So I'll give you a little tour of the actual creature. There's the wings up here. I'll tell you how I got into all the feathers, and that's one of the biggest parts of the lesson today, is how I was able to do very tiny scales and then mix it in with skin, feathers, and fur all at the same time. All right, so we got, it's a pretty nasty looking creature here. I'm staying zoomed in just so I don't have to keep zooming out and back in when I'm showing you guys details. But those are the feet, those are the nasty little spider legs we got going on there. And then, I don't even remember what I named this thing. But anyway, I just want to show you how I actually did that. And I'm going to be drawing over here on the side, make sure it's in view here. And then also, I have a piece of paper here, just printer paper. There's a lot of shading going on. We're talking probably 10, 15 plus passes in every direction. So even if I try to keep my page clean by not touching it, something will smudge, so I have to be careful. I don't want to spray it because I probably want to come back and change a few things on the drawing. But anyway, let's get into it. So advanced drawing techniques. Let's say that you're pretty comfortable with shading now. Your skill level is intermediate to advanced, and you want to take it to the next level, and you want to add that crispness to it that you can't find out how to do. Well, when I start doing artwork like this and sketching like this, it all really does come down to that foundation, the shading at first. So what I like doing is I'll do an outline. Let's make up another bird head here. Okay, something very light. I'll pay attention to make sure that I stay in frame. So this beak is going to be, well, the head itself is going to be a little smaller, but I'll make the beak pretty visible so it can separate from the feathers. All right, I'm going to put a little mouth slit there. So notice how sharp I'm keeping that's not even a word. That's a blooper. I'm keeping that in. Notice how sharp I'm keeping the pencil. That's very important. And please, by all means, sharpen it 20 or 30 times per sketch session if you really need to. Especially if you're drawing with black Prismacolor, which is made of ink. You definitely need to keep sharpening that. Okay, so let's go a little creepy again. Okay, because you know the beak up here, it's very unorthodox. We don't see beaks like that in nature. But at the same time, I had to look at reference when drawing this. So I was looking at lizards, I was looking at different bird species, like I looked a little bit at the hornbill, the vulture. I think the vulture was a big one. So down here, I'm going to put like a little curve to it. So maybe, as you can see it now, so maybe in the planet or the biome that this bird lives in, maybe it needs it curved because of the food source. That's how it cracks the food source. Maybe there's like nuts in the tree. Maybe that's how it cracks bones if it's a meat eater. I mean, that's pretty weird to say a bird is cracking bones, but hey, you know, if it's a carnivore, then it's a carnivore. Okay, so the other thing that I like doing when I do advanced drawing techniques is, like always, it starts with the foundation, but also I need the eye placement. All right, so the eye up here is pretty far back, but it's close to the mouth slit. So whenever I draw anything creepy, I tend to put the eyeball very close to the mouth slit, and the further you move it away from the mouth, the more natural it looks, just based on what we see in nature of Earth. Because a lot of times, eyes don't really grow close to the mouth, but when they do, you have to do a double take. Like if there's a specific lizard or some kind of fish that just looks really strange, you know, that strangeness factor is usually what sets your creatures apart from others. All right, so all of these juicy feathers up here, okay, all of that was super lightly drawn, and then I went in with a darker pencil. And then the black is black Prismacolor, and we'll be using that too. All right, so this silhouette that I have here, I'm actually pretty happy with this right off the bat. That's why I was drawing really slow, just to figure out what I wanted to do. So now is the time to put in an eye, and I think I'm going to put in maybe a slanted one, almost as if it's lizard slash dragon-like, or some kind of weird reptilian beast that lives on another planet. However, this isn't necessarily a reptile. I mean, yeah, you can think of an Archaeopteryx, but you know, even with an Archaeopteryx, it was more bird than lizard-like. Those things were pretty awesome looking. If you don't know what that is, you know, it's one of the few ancient bird-like dinosaur lizards that was discovered, if you want to call it a dinosaur lizard. Okay, so now that we have that, I'm actually pretty happy with that right off the bat. So I'm going to take my pencil and I'm going to give a couple passes across the face, just one pass, just to see how everything is coming together. Okay, so part of advanced drawing is mastering the hand pressure that you are using when you draw anything, basically. It's so that how can I put this? The repetition that you have done this with is so much that you don't even think about it anymore. And I don't think about laying these foundation passes down anymore. I just want to make sure that they're all down. And when you do this, you want to make sure that each pass that you give, you're not pushing harder on the second pass, because you want to fill everything in lightly at first, and then you start to build on it and push a little harder to make things darker. That's what you have to remember. You never want to start dark right off the bat unless you absolutely know to a certainty that the area that you are making dark is going to stay like that and that you didn't make a mistake. And the way I'm holding my pencil is like if I draw super lightly and I have to barely press on the paper, the end of the pencil is right here, you can see it, and then I just barely squeeze my fingers on the pencil. So my pinky is guiding my hand, so it's down here off the screen, and I just go back and forth. And if there's a smaller area, this is where control comes in. So a more advanced technique isn't even about like physically putting graphite to paper, it's just about how you're controlling your hand movement. It's if you come into a very narrow area that you have to shade, that can screw you up a lot. So you have to be careful, and just smaller strokes will do it. So the more you can control your hand, the easier that's going to be, and the lighter the better. Okay, this is where patience comes in, because we want to see results instantly with our drawings, especially if we're not satisfied at first and then we think we can fix it, and more often than not we're not going to be able to fix it. Okay, so that was what, 2-3 passes. So let's do another one that's almost the same angle but not quite. No, that's far different. I tilted that more than I thought. There we go. Okay, so again, the other reason why you don't want to get darker is because if you look at this creature's head and basically all of the feathers here, you see the light parts of all of the feathers in here, all of the fur. That's the tone of the paper. Okay, that's this right here, the shadow, or I'm sorry, the shading that I did here, it's just as light as what you see in the light sources on the creature. I didn't get darker than that. What I did was I laid a good foundation across this creature, the whole thing, and then I started to build the darkness after I laid this down. So those of you that have subscribed to me and know my technique, just try to draw along with me, and I'm happy to help you. Just like comment and let me know how your progress is doing. And if you're new to the channel, this is my technique. So I do a minimum of 3 different passes across an area when I shade, and then after that I know and I'm confident that the foundational, that was a horrible word choice, I know that the layer of shading that I put down first is going to be believable. Okay, so that's still not enough. Okay, this is what I mean by advanced. So this is when patience is really going to come in. Okay, remember, you're not drawing for anybody. Okay, so if you want results fast, but you want to get good, you can't have both. Okay, the better you get, the faster you get at something. That goes not just for drawing, just for anything. It takes patience. You know, it takes you going to the basketball court after practice and shooting an extra 100, 500, 1,000 free throws until you get good at it. It's the same thing. Okay, so that's actually looking pretty decent. That's about as dark as I want to get it. And you can already see some form taking shape, and I didn't even do anything. And that's just the power. Like, your brain is already filling in the gaps. It's already imagining muscles and beak and skin and fur, all that fun stuff that you're going to put on there. So once we have an area like that in here, we can start to play with some beak shapes. And whenever you're doing a bird creature, you should always give a beak that we haven't seen before. And yeah, when we look at reference, we want to, put a shape in there that we can relate to, something that we can draw reference from in our own minds without getting too crazy and too alien. But at the same time, you want to have fun with it, because there's a lot of opportunity within beak drawing when you just do birds in general. All right, so we're gonna focus on this eye area around here just to get some realistic shapes in. I think what I want to do is maybe have the entire eyeball more protruding than even this one up here. So this one you can kind of see where it's sunken in right by the caruncula, so that little spot where the tear duct is. There's some fleshy parts around here, like the bottom eyelid, the top eyelid. I'm going to make this more bulbous and just have it be poking out some. So maybe the bird is kind of squinting. There we go. And that'll help me see some of the personality coming through, some of the character. Okay, so once we have this, and also the other thing I want to add, I don't necessarily want to make this bird evil, even though birds do have dark eyes. So I'm just going to round off the top of the eyeball so that it's not furrowing its brow or looking angry. It's just going to be a big black eye with a little bit of a shine on it, maybe from the light source from around it. Okay, so the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to put in some darker shading right underneath the jawline and the beak, because I know that's where the shadow is going to be. At least that's where I want it to be. And that's all I'm going to put in there. So you can start to see the buildup of all the passes for the shading now. And you're probably wondering, wait a minute, how am I going to get to all the feathers and stuff? Well, let me explain that. So the next thing to do, and make sure that your pencil's sharp, and the feathers / fur that's going to be around here, so that it's going to be so tiny that you can start to draw little wisps and little marks coming right off that beak. And they're really small too. So you're not going to do big ones. You're just going to kind of play with these little marks, and then pay attention to the shape of the skull and the muscles that the fur and feathers are actually growing on top of, because you want to follow that shape. So for example, if I'm starting the feathers right here, maybe I want to fan the feathers out going down across the mouth, or I'm sorry, the cheek. So I want to make sure that all the directions that I'm going are with the fur are in that direction. Because at the end of the fur, these markings are so tiny that eventually they're going to get bigger and bigger and bigger, and then I'm going to start rounding them off. Okay, and what I mean by rounding them off is, if I have, let's do it a little bigger out here. If I have a little stalk, I'm just going to round it off at the end like this. I'm going to round that off, and then I'm going to look in the space in between these two that I drew, and I'll do maybe a smaller one that's slightly crooked. And I'll keep layering them up like that, so that what happens is you start to see all of these like live together. That's what's going to make realistic fur and feathers. And I've touched base with this before on a video, but I mean, I do want to get into a more details about how to do that, because I understand how frustrating it can be learning how to draw fur and feathers for that, but mainly fur. All right, so what I'm doing here is I'm looking at all the spots in between the beak, like the bottom beak and the top beak, where light is not penetrating inside that mouth, but there could be a slight scratch on the beak from maybe like a past injury or something along those lines. And in doing so, I'll put small little black marks in there. And that's to show that that is the darkest of the dark. There's no light getting in between that part of the beak. And I haven't even used the black Prismacolor yet. All right, so you want to use the black Prismacolor sparingly until you know for certain that what is down on your paper is down and you don't want to change anything. All right, so I'm just going to put in some elongated ovals here. Yes, I'm moving my pencil in an oval shape. It's not going straight across, it's actually rounding off a little bit. It just helps me with the details, and it helps me control my shading. There we go, right like that. And then I'm going to turn it a little bit, and then I'm going to hit that at a different direction. I'll probably go straight across this time. Now notice how I'm still not getting dark. I'm still not. But you can start to see there are hints of a skull underneath that, like hints of a muscular structure, and here's the beak out here, and then all of a sudden this is the fleshy part because the fur is here, and then here's the throat down here. So you definitely want to have patience when it comes to advanced drawing techniques, because it's not going to come quickly and it's not going to come easy. This is something that you have to keep practicing at, and you will get it. So I know that you're probably drawing along right now or just watching me and going, there's no way I'm going to do that. My drawings are awful. I can't get there. My sketchbooks are horrible. I don't know what I'm doing. I just want you to know that we have all felt that before, and you will get past it. It just takes repetition. It definitely takes repetition, and also you just got to put in the mileage. Because one day it's going to click. You just have to be intentional with your training, and one day it will click. So right now what I'm doing is I'm putting in small little fur marks. Okay, now when it comes to the fur marks, and I'll zoom in here so you can actually see it a little better. Okay, that's about as far as I can get. All right, so hopefully you can see that okay. And then maybe enough of the crazy bird creature up here so you can see it. We're going to be doing the same type of beak over here. So I'm going to show you how I did all the little markings in there, and then all of a sudden adding the black for the finishing touch. So I'll show you how to do that. But first we got to take care of the face. So notice how I started to ghost in some fur, and I want to leave some of the cream color of the paper. It doesn't matter what paper you're drawing on. All right, you could be drawing on white, gray, doesn't matter. Just leave some of that tone in between each strand of hair or clump so that it has its own natural highlight, and you don't have to go back in there with some kind of special pencil like a gouache pencil or something along those lines. So maybe this is a baby. Maybe the fur, the feathers even haven't even formed all the way yet. It's just like a gross little baby. Another fun transitional area is where the beak touches the fur. So you could do one of two things. You can keep that separate like I have here. So when you look up here at this beak, you'll clearly see the outline like behind that tooth. Like that big tooth, or I could just outline that tooth even more. So you'll see the outline of the beak, and then the bottom one right here. It's clear as day. Or you can fade it in. So this isn't a beak up here, but you can see how I faded the feathers in with the rest of the face. You could do the same thing with the fur, so maybe it hasn't really grown into its shape yet, and the baby, I guess you can call it, is still growing. So maybe some of that fur is going to be connected to the beak. So you want to soften that outline up. That's another trick to do, is you want to soften edges up when the transition is not supposed to be as clear. it's going to help you add realism to your sketches, no matter what you're drawing. Okay, so see how realistic that's looking already, and we've barely done anything. That's the key. Now, I'm not 100% confident at this drawing because I still need to concentrate. All right, so when even if you've been drawing a very long time, like I have, or maybe some of you have for decades, you still need to sit back and think of, am I doing this right? Because even though I don't like using an eraser, guess what I still have handy just in case? I have my eraser, okay? And there's no shame in using it. But you want to take a step back and you want to make sure that you go as mistake-free as possible. And it helps you become more strategic and self-editing when you can do this. It's like you become your own art director. So I just had an idea. Now that I just drew that little hump right there on the beak, I darkened the edge here because I'm confident that I like that permanently. I think that's going to be its nostril. It's a good place for it. So I'm just going to hint at a little hole, and I'm just going to fade that shadow of the hole off down the beak. So if you even want those little things to look realistic, like the little nostril holes if you're doing a beak, or just an animal in general where the fur is really fine and you can see a lot of facial features, putting in a dark mark and then fading that off into the surface goes a long way. Because then it'll really bring out the realism when I start to put details on the beak, like the black and everything. It'll all really come together. Okay, so the end of the mouth is right about here, and you can't really see it on birds. There's no lip to birds. Okay, maybe an ostrich or an emu, like one of the big birds, where they actually do have, I guess you can call them lips on the side of the beak. Crazy looking things. But anyway, I'm just going to put some tufts of fur right here. And then that's eventually going to flow into feathers. There we go. So if you notice when looking at this creature, that because I made the eyes more like a bird and not human-like, it almost adds a sense of, how should I put this? It almost looks like there's determination with this bird just to live. You know, like when humans are walking around, we can see our own facial expressions. Like our eyebrows go up in surprise or fear or excitement. You know, they push together if we're thinking about something or if we're worried. This thing, it just wants to go around and hop around and eat stuff. That's all it wants to do. Maybe find a fish or a crayfish or something. You know, and you gotta, when you do that, and that's part of the character, when you start putting these little details in, is like the eyeball. I know it's cliche. I'm going to keep saying this every time I do eyes. It's the windows to the soul, or they're the windows to the soul. It's definitely true. Like no matter what you draw, it's definitely true. Cruising along at a pretty good rate here with this fur. I'm keeping everything really tiny. Okay, because out here is where I'm going to start to round things off, because I want the feathers to be a little bigger. And there's many shapes to feathers too. Some are rounded at the end. I mean, you can see here, I'll move this out of the way. Some of these are pretty matted. I was looking at an owl for reference. And then the wing up here, pretty common shape for feathers. You know, some of these might have split ends just because nothing is super clean on a bird's wing. I mean, I was looking at owls, I was looking at peregrine falcons, eagles, just so many different kinds of birds before I got what I wanted. And even the birds that barely have any feathers at all, they're just, I mean, not like a penguin, but, you know, the really short feathered birds. I was looking at finches, robins. We have robins everywhere here. All right, so all these little darker marks are kind of like crevices. And that's what's really going to add depth to your fur and feathers. Now notice how when I get closer to the mouth with these little crevices, the markings get smaller. And then as I move away, they get bigger. It's because the length of the fur and feathers are growing as I move down the face and the neck. That's what's also going to add realism. That's an advanced technique that when practiced enough, you don't even have to think about it, you just do it. Because you know it's supposed to happen like that. Now, does it have to on every single creature that you invent? No, because that's the beauty of creatures. You can make stuff up and bend the rules a little bit, but if you want to have some form of familiarity, like if somebody doesn't draw at all and they don't even like creature movies or whatever, and they look at this thing, go, oh yeah, that's believable. It's crazy looking, but it's believable. That's kind of like where you want to be at. Okay, so you can start to see how these are getting thicker as I move up the forehead. All right, and that's pretty decent too. I'm kind of happy with that. I mean, of course, I could spend all day on that little part, but I'm not going to. So the next thing that I want to do is I want to start adding some structure on this beak. All right, so I have a nice coating down. I got some indication of where the feathers are and the overall shape of the beak that I want and the head. So let's start figuring out some areas where there's flat planes and places where maybe some of this beak is a little sharper than others. So like for example, this line that I'm putting down here, I'm pretty confident that everything under it is going to be a little darker. That's more harder of an edge. It's similar to what I did for this creature's beak of here. Of course, this is super pronounced, and I'll show you how I did that too, because we're going to put all the dark tips and the marks on this beak. Just wait till you see what happens when I add the black designs on here, like I have in this one up here. It's really going to have the entire thing pop. So I'm doing tiny little circles. And those of you that aren't familiar with my technique, the reason I do tiny little circles when I shade is because whenever you do a shading mark and then you do a circle, you go back over what you previously did. So it's kind of like a corkscrew, and you just keep going. And then it goes back over what you did and it corrects itself. So if you just stay light and you keep going, you can cover an area much faster. So if you have a small area like this where you barely have to move your hand, you can do tiny little markings like this and really cover a big area, especially if you get that nice little flat spot on the pencil. Everybody knows what that is. All right. And then here, if you want to add some fuzz, you just draw hair and tiny little marks like you saw me start. And then you take this and put it over like here. Okay, you just lightly glide your pencil over, and what that does, the graphite kind of smooths it out so it looks rather fuzzy. There we go. And I'm going to put some shading up here at the top. So the reason I'm putting some shading up here at the top, very, very top where all those feathers are and then the fur mixed in, is because there's going to be a coarse shadow on this thing. It's a rounded shape, for one. And two, this creature is pretty much lit rather dimly from the side of its face. There's not going to be much shadow. But I will put a dark spot right here in the front of the opening, because it's going to signify, or signal, it's going to signal, not signify, whatever, that the beak is in 3D and there's shape on the other side of the mouth. There we go. So now it looks like it's kind of opening. Okay, so here's the fun part. I'm going to lightly place where I want the stripes to exist with my regular graphite. Alright, so we're going to do something a little exotic. I'm not getting dark yet. I'm just placing where I want it to happen. And I want to stay congruent with what's happening on the bottom of the beak. So any of the markings up here, I want to make it look like it belongs in one stripe. There we go. Because that tip is going to get it too. And when you darken the tips of these things, it's really going to come out. Okay, now's the time for the black Prismacolor. So let's see if I can actually find my black prism. There we go. Nope, that's not it. Pardon me while I search for my pencil. There it is. Okay, so you want to keep it sharp. See how sharp that is? And I'm going to do an outline of the beak first. Thick to thin lines. If you're not familiar with what that is, please check out my foundation playlist where I go over how you can draw and learn how to draw if you've never picked up a pencil in your life, and I go over thick to thin lines. But I mention it in several videos, not just that one. So when I put the outline in, it helps me solidify that shape. And it also brings it forward a little bit. And that's what I want. The other thing is, like, when you have a stripe, even if you're drawing a zebra or a cougar or something, that if the stripe is going underneath somewhere to where it's going to be in shadow, that's going to be a darker part of the stripe as well. So underneath the chin, I'm going to put little circles, and then as it goes up the beak, I'm going to continue the circles, but I'm going to push less hard. Like that. And then here, same thing. So it's going to be a little harder down there by the, I guess you can call it the lip. Right inside here, because you don't want to do these lines too much, but right inside here is when we're going to start pushing a little harder. Now, if you've noticed how I've come up this stripe, okay, there's imperfections in here, there's little blotches, that's good. That means that the surface that the stripe is actually growing on, which is the beak is not perfect. It could be weathered, there could be battle wounds, it's just how it grew. It's like everybody's bones are different, you know, like bone marrow, if you look at horns of rhinos, that kind of surface quality. All right, so when you look at an area like this, you go, okay, underneath here is definitely going to be dark. And like I say in all my sketches, here comes the fun part. So now I'm getting darker, and I'm just going to do tiny, tiny little circles, and I'm going to fade it up into the side of the beak. Now, you'll notice that when I faded it up, there's that light spot. I want to keep that. I'm going to get dark over here by the lip, and then I'm just going to fade it off into that light spot. Now, why would I do that, you ask? What that does is it creates the illusion that there's an entire ridge or a light catcher running across that beak. Okay, we did this a lot in industrial design when we were learning how to draw vehicles, because vehicles have the same thing. You know, like on the side of the vehicle, you have your rocker panel at the bottom in between both wheels that you can step on if you have a big truck. Certain accent lines, certain belt lines that go across the surface of the car. So I want to do the same thing here. But here's the thing. I want to keep this more rigid. Okay, I don't want it to look so rounded. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take my pencil and I'm going back with the graphite now, and I'm going to sharpen that off. Do you see that jagged little cutoff right there? What that does is it gives the illusion that right underneath that is going to be a part of the beak where it's like a sharp turn inwards towards the mouth. And it also adds a really good 3D effect on that too. So you can start to see this mouth really coming into play. Okay, and you can see how I started to build up details. Now that's how this one started. That's how the entire body started on this thing. Okay, but it's bit by bit. Okay, so let's do stripe number 2. I'm holding them like this. So I got my black Prismacolor and I got my graphite ready. And I'm gonna darken that stripe, leave a tiny little bit of the original shading, and I'm gonna darken the stripe at the bottom. And the beautiful thing about mixing black Prismacolor with graphite is they fill in each other's gaps. Like the texture is gonna be different. So when you draw with a regular pencil, it's obviously, like when you're shading, it's going to fill in more of the grit of the paper. And then a black Prismacolor, which is made of wax, it's going to be rougher looking. So if you marry those two together, you're going to have a really nice texture going. Okay, so I want to continue that stripe going up. Here's that little jagged part again, but we need to be careful about this because we can't show the edges of the jaggedness. So we just got to stay the width of the stripe, and then don't push as hard and just work your way up the beak. Okay, because that stripe is working its way all the way inside the mouth. I mean, it's going in there. And it just kind of moves up like this. Now, the other thing that you can do is you can go back to your graphite, and right up here at the top of the beak, remember what I said about the core shadow with the fur and the feathers and how I just lightly put in that that roundness right there. You do the same thing at the top of the beak. Okay, we have the stripe going up to the edge, but we don't want to make it all black because there's going to be a little bit of a coarse shadow right up there at that stripe. And then we're going to leave it be. And then the same thing happens with the smaller stripe going up. Heck, that stripe might not even go all the way up, I don't know. Because what's going to happen is you're just going to add in a nice little coarse shadow, very, very faint, and you're going to go along the side of that beak. Right like that. And the blackness of the stripe is already taken care of. And you want to make sure that the stripe is actually darker than that core shadow that you put on here, because the material is different. It's like you know, a pigment of your skin, where if you have I guess like a birthmark or another patch of skin that's darker than your normal skin tone around it, when light hits that and the shadow hits that, usually the marking will look a little darker. Okay, that's just what happens when light hits different colors. So now I'm starting to realize that maybe this beak on the bottom can be a pretty jagged as far as like the side goes. I think that's going to be a nice little accent line, and then it sharpens off in the front. Yeah, there we go. Okay, the joy of making up bird beaks. Okay, so this will probably be in shadow now. Okay, so this area right here is really smooth. And I'm not even done with it yet, because I'm still going to go in different angles, and I'm just going to put in the graphite with the black Prismacolor that I did, and I'm just going to keep putting them together until I get a really nice smooth transition between each one. There we go. Now it looks like, since I've been drawing this, the top beak, how it's rounded on the side right here, there's going to be a tiny little cast shadow that's going to roll on that bottom beak. So you want to make sure that you indicate where that cast shadow is. These are advanced techniques that you can learn just by practicing. It's hard to cover everything. It's like if you just practice drawing forms, cubes, cones, cylinders, and spheres, I know it's boring, but please trust me when I say this. If you do those 4 shapes, you're going to learn so much. And yes, a lot of it is done by trial and error. But by trial and error, you start to pick up your own style. You start to learn the fundamentals of shading. It's just repetition with movement of your hand. When you start to relax and control your movements, that's when it's really going to come into play. Okay, we're not done with the beak. So we're not going to do exactly what we did with the beak up here, because this beak's a pretty wild shape. But I think down here I'm going to add in some slight markings on it, just ever so slightly. Put in some markings. Another trick that I like doing is when you have the light catcher and then the shadow, that nice dulled line in between, put some dents in there so it really shows up. So it gives you an excuse to extend the shadow all the way up. It's like a crevice or a crack. It just shows that this bird has been through it, or it's older. There we go. You see here I'm going back with my regular pencil and I'm just outlining the stripes just a little bit more, because I wasn't quite convinced on how that was. And just to have fun with this, why don't we just put like a little impromptu shape right here. There we go. And it's on the side, so it doesn't really matter. And then maybe one right here, just a tiny one. So that way it doesn't look predictable. It's as if like what I did up here with this tiny little one in between the big ones. Just makes it a little bit more interesting. Alright, so I'm going to take my black Prismacolor and I'm going to go back over the eyeball. And I'm going to make sure that the bottom and the top of the eye are actually rounded versus straight across. If you put them straight across, you run the risk of making the bird look angry. And you don't necessarily want it to look angry. Now, the muscle on top of it, like the eyebrow, I'm just going to try to round that off with it so that it just looks like a curious bird creature and it's not angry like it's going to tear you apart or anything. All right, if I saw this bird on another planet or some other dimension, depending on how big it is, I probably wouldn't really mind. There's no teeth, and if it's small, then you could probably get away with it, you know, like walking close to it. So now that I have this nice shaded area in between here, I'm going to go back over it. I'm going to push a little darker and form these large clumps. This is where the fur is. And at the tips of the fur, I'm going to darken those a little bit. Right like that. And then here's that nice opportunity to transition the beak in with the hair or fur, so that you can start to make them look like the fur is growing out from it. Okay, and right here in the corner of the mouth, it's not going to be that far back, but I do want to put some shading in here, just some little oval shapes, to get the sense that there's muscle and there's a skull that's biting down, and the skin around it, the bird skin under everything, needs to fold too. The next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to pay attention to the area surrounding the eye, and I want to make sure that the feathers and everything that are surrounding that eyeball look as realistic as possible. So I've left pretty much all of the surrounding eye bare. There's some little indications of fur and feathers, but for the most part it's pretty bare. Down here where the fuzz happens, like here's the beak, here's the fur, and then here's the eye, I'm going to put some dark marks right down here because, one, the shadow's down here. Okay, that whole eye is casting a shadow down here, this big meaty part. So I want that to be a little darker. And this is also going to add some character to it. So maybe in the fur and in the feathers, there's going to be a stripe happening that could possibly move back in between all of this other, you know, fur. Because I'm mixing fur and feathers together. So these are bigger. As a matter of fact, I think I'm going to do that. I think that would be kind of cool. So maybe, since there's some pretty dark stripes obviously on the beak, what if we extend some of that up into the face? And I'm just going to move in between some of the clumps of fur like this. And another thing that I did, you'll notice up here in the bird head, some of the tips of the feathers actually got darker, and I just left the opening in here to show the tone of the paper. So I think I'm going to do some of that, although the feathers on this particular bird, they're much thicker, okay, especially in the face. So what I'm going to do is I'm probably just going to darken the tip. Not probably, I am going to darken the tip right here and just have it be close to the eye. So it's almost like a 45-degree angle. It's going to come at us. Maybe some of this pattern is going to flow right up into the feathers and just travel up the head, and then have some really cool little fray going on here, maybe as it moves out. That'd be kind of neat. Because when you put all these details in like this, especially near the eye, so I'm holding the pencil closer to the tip now. I have my printer paper that's laying on top of this original creature that I have so I don't ruin it. And I'm just relaxing my hand, and this allows me to push just a little harder and control all the movements. So once I start putting in the details around that eye, you can start to see the character really come to life. Now I don't want to add anything else here. I want to keep that part light, because that's the light catcher. Remember what I said about the beak. You want those light catchers happening to add depth and realism to it and 3D structure. That's another thing that lacks, I think, in a lot of just drawing in general, is structure and form. So when you start to play with the light and just leave the paper as is, you can, it's amazing what you can achieve when you don't have an eraser with you, you don't have gouache, you don't have anything, even a white colored pencil. If you're trying to get a highlight somewhere, it's amazing what you can achieve if you just leave the tone of the paper and just start to work your way around it. So now what I'm doing is this beak, I'm going to indicate the edge of it right here at the corner of the mouth, and then it gets into that fray and that fuzz. This part of the beak, the whole nasal cavity right there, that is overhanging. Okay, and then you have this part of the beak that's actually poking out, and that's what I want. So in here, on the bottom part, it's also poking out. Now you can start to see the 3D effect happening. It looks like, hey, I'm going to pass this off to a modeler. Please model this, and then we'll see what happens in 3D when we start to turn the head around. Okay, the same thing is going to happen down here in the slit in the mouth. So remember that shadow that I added here? I'm just going to put in some very tiny dark lines, and they're going to fray outwards from the corner of that mouth. Okay, so it's almost like it's going to disperse evenly, almost like a firework. Okay, it's funny. I started thinking of the game Contra. Okay, because Contra I grew up with. I started playing Contra when I was like 7 or 8, and I remember the spread gun, and that was such a cool gun. It just sprayed these red bullets everywhere. Those of you that know what Contra is, just comment below. Tell me if you remember that from back in the 80s. There was Contra, Super Contra 3, but they had that spread gun and it just sprayed. There I go, off a side story here. We'll drawing a bird creature and talking about games in the 80s. Okay, there we go. Now we're getting somewhere. That's looking pretty good. And then in here, I'm just going to put some pretty dark marks. I'm not using black Prismacolor, I'm using my regular pencil. These are areas between the clumps of feather and fur where the least amount of light is touching, because I want all of the light around those areas to pop out coming towards us. That's what makes it seem 3D to us. There we go. If you're enjoying this content, I encourage you to check out the links below for Creature Design Workshop Discord. It's a bustling community. It's growing every day. We have an influx of people coming in just to learn how to draw, just to peruse it. We got reference channels, we got chat channels, and I'm also running a creature design workshop that you can sign up for, and I run it on the Discord. There's a link in the description below for that as well. There's a website for it. And you can read about the syllabus and what we do. You can look at student samples. It's a lot of fun. There's spots left now because this is the end of June, but every month, you know, the spots tend to fill up in the last 3 days of the month, and I begin it at the beginning of the next month. Okay, and you got to sign up for it. So please, if you're interested in learning how to design creatures from scratch, and also I encourage all skill levels to join. It doesn't even matter if you've only been drawing a month, if you've never drawn before, if you're an industry veteran, doesn't matter, because there's never like, you should always brush up on your skills. I do. I have to, you know. And if you've been in the industry a long time and you want to learn how to draw really gnarly critters, take a look at what everybody's been doing. There's some really cool stuff. I've just been adding some shapes here on this beak. I'm almost done with it. Whenever I'm at this level, I can keep nitpicking the area, but no matter how I move the head around now, I'm pretty satisfied with it. I could go on for another couple hours, but I don't really need to do that. I think I've gotten the point across. I'm pretty happy with it. And out here, I'm just going to fade off some indications of more fur and feathers, because we already know what the details of the body are probably going to look like, and we can just scribble that in. So I hope you've enjoyed today's lesson. This is on advanced drawing techniques. If you've had trouble following along with me, or you're pretty frustrated with drawing in general, it's okay. It's okay to mess up. This is why I encourage people to draw thumbnails, scribbling. Your scribbles are going to look like hairballs, and that's totally fine. You have to allow yourself to fail. It's okay. We all are not good at stuff at first until we become good at it. All right, so check out those links in the description like I mentioned, and I really appreciate you guys stopping by. Like and subscribe if you enjoyed it. If you want to see more content, I'll see you all in the next one. Later.